Tucked away in the far north of Canada, where rivers freeze solid in the winter and endless forests stretch all the way to the horizon, lies a land of breathtaking wilderness and an eeriness that words can hardly describe. This is the Nahanni Valley, a place where nature seems never to have bowed to the hand of man, and where time itself flows to a rhythm all its own, quiet, slow, and cold as the mountains that encircle it. They say that every land holds a memory, a soul of its own. And Nahanni, though hauntingly beautiful, has never been a land that welcomes strangers. For over a century, miners, explorers, and the bold-hearted have ventured into this place with the same hope, that beneath its ancient bedrock lies a cache of gold still untouched. But the greater the dream, the higher the price. Many entered the valley with eyes burning with ambition, only to leave behind nothing but footprints fading in the snow. Or worse, to leave behind nothing at all. A lucky few made it out. They spoke of bitterly cold nights, strange noises echoing through the silent woods, and a presence, something with eyes, watching them from behind the trees. But most of the others exist now only in the memories of loved ones, in missing persons reports, and in stories passed from mouth to mouth like whispered warnings no one dares speak too loudly. Because of the unsolved deaths, the burned corpses, and the bodies found without their heads, this place came to be known by another name, Headless Valley, a name that sends a chill through the spine, and a truth few are willing to accept. Today we're going back to that valley, not to search for gold, but to understand why so many have vanished chasing a dream that glowed so brightly, until it didn't. And maybe, just maybe, through the traces still left behind in the snow, we'll glimpse what those lost souls saw before they never came back. So fasten your seatbelt as we dive into today's mystery. But first, you might just have incredible luck if you like and subscribe before this video ends. In the autumn months, when the fog begins to creep slowly through the dense forests of the tundra, a man named Lefebvre ventured into the heart of the Nahanni Valley, accompanied by 2 RCMP officers. A seasoned trapper, he had spent his life navigating treacherous mountain passes and crossing fragile sheets of ice that few dared to tread. But even after facing down hungry grizzlies and sudden whiteout blizzards, Lefebvre always regarded Nahanni as something else entirely, not just dangerous, but unnatural. The 3 men had what seemed to be a simple mission: to trace the path of a young prospector who had vanished without a word, a man who had once been engaged, but never showed up to his own wedding. While the 2 officers carried orders and firearms, Lefebvre brought only his instincts and the quiet caution of a man who had heard far too many strange stories whispered from beneath those snow-laden hills. At first, the journey passed in an almost suffocating silence. The wind whispered through blackened pine branches like charcoal, and the autumn sun hung low, flickering like a silver coin behind thick clouds. Lefebvre usually led the way, occasionally stopping and turning to glance back at his companions, struggling across the unforgiving terrain. There were moments when he chewed silently on strips of dried meat, his eyes never leaving the treetops in the distance, where something he felt was watching them. Then came the first sign that something wasn't right: a forgotten trap, half buried in the forest floor, with the rotting corpse of a lynx still caught inside. To Lefebvre, this was not just an old, neglected snare, it was a message. Someone had passed through, had set this trap, but had never returned to check it. And if a hunter abandons his prey, it almost always means something has gone terribly wrong. But the 2 officers, with their indifferent eyes and self-assured demeanor, dismissed the warning as if it were just another triviality of the wild. They didn't understand that the forest never leaves signs by accident. Everything out here has meaning. And sometimes, it's the smallest details that whisper first of a death drawing near. Hours later, when more traps began to appear, each containing a carcass left to rot, the silence between the 3 men grew heavier. Shadows had begun to slither down from the mountain slopes, crawling beneath the dense canopy overhead. And in that still, suffocating air, Lefebvre knew they were crossing into a place no one was ever meant to enter. That afternoon, when the sun had become nothing more than a pale glow suspended in a gray sky, the three men followed a frozen creek that flowed into a branch of the flat river. Beneath the thin layer of snow, the ground gradually turned into a thick black sludge, a sign that they were nearing the area marked on the crude map left behind by the missing man. And it was there, at a silent bend in the water, that a small boat appeared among the reeds like a forgotten memory. The boat was half submerged, half afloat, its bow wedged between moss-covered rocks, and deep gouges along its hull exposed the rotting wood beneath. There was no one, no supplies, just a boat resting in the wrong place, as if someone had left in a hurry or had been forced to leave. No one said a word, but all three quickened their pace. They advanced another few hundred yards, and then a burnt scent drifted in with the wind. There was no mistaking it. It was the smell of scorched wood mixed with cold ash, the unmistakable scent left behind by a fire that had consumed everything. As the charred frame of a cabin came into view among the trees, the two officers instinctively drew their weapons. They moved cautiously, eyes scanning every corner of the blackened ruin. But Lefebvre, the guide, was not looking at the remains of the cabin. He was staring into the space between the trees beyond it, where the shadows always seemed thicker than they should be, as if hiding something that knew how to watch. When the three men finally stood before the ashes, what silenced them wasn't the remains of the shelter, but what was left of the man they had come to find. There were no signs of a struggle, no scattered blood, just a body, blackened by fire, lying still beside a rifle, its barrel twisted at an unnatural angle, bent in a way no human hands could have done. Next to the body was a neat arrangement of items: a backpack, a folded tent, and several rolls of untreated animal hide. No one dared touch them. The unnatural order of it all made the scene feel wrong, too precise, too intentional, as though someone or something had tidied up after it was all over. But the most disturbing part was that the man's head was gone. In his scorched hand, he still gripped an old revolver, as if he had fired it at something. But here, there were no signs of an enemy, no footprints, no marks to suggest a fight had ever taken place. Lefebvre didn't need more proof. He had grown up with the whispered stories of this land, of headless deaths, of screams in the forest that no one could explain. And he knew that if he stayed one more night, he might become the next story told. There was no debate, no justification. He turned and stated clearly, within the hour, he would be heading back to where there were still living people, whether anyone followed him or not. Behind them, smoke continued to rise from the smoldering ashes, thin, cold, and quiet, like a warning whispered through the trees. When winter draped its icy veil over the Nahanni and snow fell silently upon the frozen river, stories of disappearance began to circulate. At first, they were just fragments: an absent hunter, a lost explorer, an abandoned camp deep in the woods. But over time, these fragments pieced themselves together into a picture, and that picture was enough to send a chill through anyone who dared to look. In 1904, brothers Frank and Willie McLeod returned from Nahanni carrying gold. Their faces glowed, their eyes bright like men who had touched the dream others spent lifetimes chasing. They claimed to have found an untouched vein of gold and swore they would return to collect the rest. And they kept their word. The following year, they headed back into the valley, bringing with them their tools and promises to share their fortune with those who had helped them. But summer passed, then winter came, and no one ever saw them again. 3 years later, a relative led a search party deep into the wilderness. Among the ruins of an old campsite, they discovered 2 skeletons. One lay beneath a blanket, as if peacefully asleep. The other lay on its side, one arm reaching toward a rifle, frozen in the act of never quite getting there. But what silenced everyone who laid eyes on the scene was that neither of the bodies had a head. No one knew what had happened. There was no blood, no signs of struggle, not a single explanation. 10 years later, Martin Jorgensen, a seasoned Swedish explorer who had traveled across some of the coldest places on Earth, sent a final letter from Nahanni to Ross River, claiming he had just discovered something big. And then, in the valley's all-too-familiar pattern, he vanished. The following year, his cabin was found burned to the ground. Inside was his body. The head was missing. In 1921, John O'Brien, a World War veteran who had survived the hell of battle, was found dead. But not on a battlefield. He was sitting quietly beside a dead campfire, fully clothed, one hand still clutching a tin coffee cup, as if time itself had frozen around him in a single, final moment. No one could explain it. A man warming himself by the fire in the middle of a snowy forest, dying suddenly, without fear, without resistance. 6 years later, a giant of a man, known in rumor as Yukon Fisher, also disappeared into the valley. He had lived in isolation, a fugitive wanted for assault, but those who had encountered him said he was no coward. And yet, in 1927, all that was found was his towering skeleton, a rifle bent as if by inhuman force, and the scorched remains of his cabin, only a short distance from where the McLeod brothers had once fallen. After that, Nahanni was no longer a place for gold seekers. It became a place where even the bravest could no longer be certain they'd come back. The footprints led deep into the woods, but there were never any footprints leading out, and sometimes they simply stopped mid-stride, as if the person who made them had been lifted clean off the ground by something unseen. No one knows for certain what guards this place. But one thing Lefebvre said remains true. The forest never leaves signs by accident. If you see something unusual, it may be the forest whispering to you, or warning you to turn back while you still can. On the map, the Nahanni Valley is little more than a pale blank space between forests and stone mountains. A quiet void, like a sheet of paper no one has yet written on. But in the memory of the native Dene people, that land was never empty. They didn't call it Nahanni. They called it the land of those on the other side, the land of the Naha. According to stories passed from one generation to the next, the Naha were no ordinary tribe. They lived in isolation, traded with no one, married no outsiders, and left behind almost nothing, except absolute fear in the hearts of those who dared to speak of them. They were described as tall, powerful, physically dominant, and most notably, they always wore masks when they went to war. No one knows exactly where the Naha once lived or when they vanished. There are no abandoned villages, no ancestral stones, no excavated remains to prove their existence. And yet, the Dene elders swear they once heard war horns echoing in the night, the heavy footfalls of warriors moving through narrow mountain passes, and the flickering light of distant fires, like a long-dead army still marching through the shadows. The tale grows darker when it comes to the Naha's brutal methods of battle. Any outsider who dared trespass into their territory was executed, not with spears or arrows, but with blades that severed the head. They did not kill out of hatred, but as part of an ancient ritual. It wasn't just about ending a life. It was about erasing the very presence of the intruder from the world, a message carved into flesh: never return. The Dene believe the headless deaths in the Nahanni Valley are the remnants of the Naha tribe, or worse, the work of their unseen descendants, who may still dwell within the forest, guarding something that does not belong to mankind. And if that's true, who among us can say for certain that every gust of wind through the canyon, every footstep sinking into the snow, isn't being watched? Perhaps what we call legend is simply a more beautiful name for a truth humanity isn't ready to face. Because maybe not everyone who entered Nahanni met with misfortune. Maybe they were judged. In the modern world, people often believe that every mystery will eventually have an answer, that with enough technology, data, and time, anything can be explained. But if you've ever stood in the Nahanni Valley at dusk, when the wind suddenly stops and the forest sinks into an unnatural silence, you'll understand why some questions were never meant to be asked. Because in that valley, there are things that exist in no biology textbook, and perhaps do not belong to this era at all. The Dene people speak of an ancient creature called Wahila, a beast part wolf, part bear, as large as a bison, silent in its movements but capable of crushing human bone with its powerful forelimbs. According to legend, Wahila does not hunt out of hunger. It hunts to protect something, a land, a curse, or a secret that humans were never meant to touch. And strangely, the story doesn't end with folklore. In the 1970s, archaeologists discovered mastodon bones buried among ashes in an unnamed cave. There were faint carvings along the stone walls, shapes too large to be wolves, too agile to be bears. The footprints found in the mud after the spring melt didn't match any known species. And when you ask the locals, they don't deny it. But they will quietly shake their heads and say only this: you're not supposed to speak its name. Beyond Wahila, there are stranger tales still, of humanoid creatures covered in hair, wielding crude clubs, living in tribal groups, and eating human flesh. The Deen call them Nuknuk. No one has ever faced them and lived to describe them in full. Only a handful of shaken witnesses claim to have seen fires in the night deep in the woods, accompanied by the stench of burning meat carried on the wind, a kind of smoke unlike any known campfire. Occasionally, a hunter returns, shaking, unable to speak, repeating only one phrase: "I thought it was a man, but then it looked at me." But the strangest reports of all don't come from the ground, they come from the sky. For decades, people have documented lights moving without pattern, sounds that shake the earth yet leave no trace, and unidentified flying objects hovering over the valley before vanishing in an instant. Some believe that if this land has remained isolated for tens of thousands of years, it may also harbor something that didn't come from this planet. There will always be those who laugh, who say these are just illusions, legends spun from fear and shadow. But those same people, if they ever find themselves standing in the valley on a dim, moonlit night with wind howling through the canyons like a voice from prehistory, they might come to understand some things do not need to be seen to be feared, because true fear comes from what the mind cannot contain. In 1945, as the world celebrated the end of the Second World War, a man named Ernest Savard quietly entered the Nahanni Valley. He was not an explorer, nor a fugitive. He was a miner from Ontario, carrying with him a dream that was simple, but no less filled with illusion: to find gold and change his life. What was discovered a few weeks later was not a dream, but a nightmare wrapped in silence. Savard was found lying motionless in his sleeping bag. His body showed no signs of burns or trauma, but his head had been placed on a nearby rock, as though in some wordless ritual carried out deep within the forest. There was no blood, no drag marks, and no one was ever arrested. The case was closed like so many others in this land, with no suspect, no answer, and no closure. Years later, in 1983, a traveler from Glacier Bay was camping near the edge of the valley when he heard faint groaning from deep within the dense trees. It didn't sound like wind. It didn't sound like an animal. There was something human in it, too weak to be the voice of the living, too persistent to belong to the dead. As he moved closer, his flashlight caught something shifting in the dark. A tall figure, draped in dark cloth, wearing a mask made of bone, was moving silently toward him. It didn't run. It didn't scream. It didn't raise a weapon. It simply walked, deliberate, steady, like it had been waiting for that moment a very long time. The man fled. He left everything behind, never looked back. He would later recount the story in a near delirious state, repeating only one thing: it wasn't human, but it knew who I was. There are no official records of the event, no reports, no investigation. Because in Nahanni, when you see something, you are often the only one who sees it. And if you're lucky enough to survive and tell the tale, no one wants to listen. The outside world, busy planting flags on the moon and perfecting microchips, seems indifferent to a stretch of primeval forest still clutching the secrets of the last century. But for those who have heard the stories, who've seen the hollow eyes of those who came back from Nahanni, there is one thing everyone agrees on: this valley is not merely unexplored land. It is land that does not wish to be understood, and will never allow itself to be owned. Perhaps it's the consequence of ancient sins, or perhaps it's a form of dark biology, a place where life has evolved along a different path, silent and feral, without the need for light. But whatever the reason, one truth remains unchanged. Those who enter Nahanni with greed in their hearts or pride in their steps rarely carry anything out with them, except fear. For over a century, the Nahanni Valley has drawn all kinds of people. Some arrived with dreams of striking it rich. Others brought courage, hoping to conquer what no one else had dared to face. And some came simply to understand, to try. But if this land has a soul, it has never wanted to be understood. And as fewer and fewer returned, people began to realize. Perhaps Nahanni was never meant to be unraveled. Much like the Superstition Mountains in Arizona, where people speak of a gold mine guarded by an unseen force, Nahanni carries with it an unnamed curse. And like superstition, it harbors something very specific that no one has ever truly seen. A boundary. There are no fences, no guards, but with every step deeper in, one feels as though they are crossing a line that was never meant to be crossed. The headless skeletons, the burned out shelters, the rifles twisted as if crushed by an invisible hand, the footprints that end mid-stride, and the strange lights that flicker above the ridgelines at midnight. All of it evokes a single, haunting feeling. Something here is watching, not with hatred, but with a silence colder than death. Science has tried to speak. It has offered explanations, natural accidents, wild animals, hallucinations brought on by harsh conditions. But no theory holds for long, because some cases leave no trace. Some people disappear as if they never existed. And some nights, what you hear cannot belong to this world. And so, people began to consider one final possibility, that perhaps humans are not meant to be everywhere, that maybe there are places where our very presence is a violation, like an ancient book whose final page you were never meant to turn, like a forest that still remembers every footstep from 100 years ago, like Nahanni, where beauty is the perfect disguise for something no one dares to name. Maybe what you've just heard is only legend, or maybe these are fragments of a truth scattered, buried under time, fear, and forgetfulness. But if there are places we've never truly understood, then perhaps we ought to enter them with reverence, not ambition. What do you think about the stories surrounding the Nahanni Valley? If something here made you pause, reflect, or reminded you of a tale you once heard, leave a comment below. I'd love to read it and explore the unknown with you. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the journeys to come, where we dive even deeper into the mysteries that remain unsolved and uncover truths that sometimes only the darkness dares to keep. Thank you for watching until the very end. And hopefully, next time, we'll still be standing on the same side of the truth.